Right, let's talk then about the Nasser Hospital in Gaza. 20 people known to have died there. Now, we can speak to Dr. Victoria Rose, who is a British surgeon who was working in Nasser Hospital until June this year. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
It must be very difficult for you to watch those pictures, knowing that you were standing in that hospital until quite recently.
Yeah, it was very difficult, and there were some friends and colleagues that I knew in some of the footage that we saw over the weekend. So it was very hard to watch.
Tell us what happens in that hospital. How you were there until June? How many patients were there? What kind of people? How was it able to operate? And did people within that hospital feel vulnerable or not?
I think Nasser's felt vulnerable ever since it went into the red zone at the beginning of June. It's the only functioning hospital in the south of Gaza at the moment. The only other hospital, the European Gaza hospital, was bombed on the 13th of May and has now been taken out of action. So it serves the entire population of the south of Gaza. There's very little ability to connect to the next biggest hospital, which is Al-Aqsa, because the Saladin Road, the main road to that other hospital, is also within the red zone. So it's an active fighting zone. So the people of the south really can't get anywhere safely. Nasser had a bed capacity of 300 when it was built, and it offers all the specialist surgical specialties. Since the war started, its bed capacity has just risen and risen. And when we were there in June, they were running at over 500 patients. They've actually built an extension at the back of the hospital to create more ward space, and they've put a marquee up next to the emergency department so that they can split the emergency department to deal with just emergencies from warfare and then non-war related emergencies. It's the only hospital that generates oxygen, and all of the field hospitals around it rely on it for that. It's the only hospital with a blood bank, and when the cold chain supply was coming in, so before the blockade, to all medical aid, it was the only hospital that could undertake all investigations such as blood tests, microbiology, histology. So it's an essential part of Gaza's healthcare.
Everything that happens that we report that's happening from Gaza, the aftermath, of course, to the horrendous October the 7th attacks is you know, it's so difficult to talk about the circumstances of each of these attacks are horrendous. This one particularly because it was a so-called double tap strike. There was a bomb attack, and then the same spot was struck again, I think 15 minutes later or so. Israel have said, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, says that Israel deeply regretted it. He described it as a tragic mishap, and that Israel does value the work of journalists, medical staff and all civilians. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I think that the double tap is not something that's new, and we've certainly seen it before. When we were in Gaza, when our teams were in Gaza in January, they were witness to several double taps on ambulances that went to aid civilians. And certainly when I was there in August, I saw the same thing. So it is a pattern that Israel have definitely been utilising. So I'm not 100% convinced that we can say it's a mishap when there is a catalogue of these events happening before. I also think you have to look at the number of journalists that have now been targeted. And this isn't the first time that Nasser has been hit. Nasser was initially evacuated in February of 2024, and then it's been hit repeatedly since then. When we were in May and June, it was hit once before we arrived and once while we were there. And the attack on it before we arrived in the May specifically took out the burns unit where a journalist was. And the feeling or the explanation from Israel was that this journalist was Hamas, but actually this journalist had reported on October the 7th, and that seemed to be the only connection that there was to Hamas. So I'm afraid without hard evidence, I would find it very difficult to believe that that was completely an accident.
Dr. Victoria Rose, thank you for talking to us. Victoria Rose is a British surgeon. She was working in that hospital, Nasser Hospital, until June this year, when, as she said herself, the hospital went into the so-called red zone.